Welcome to Pragati Vichar Literature Festival 2025. The theme for discussion today is Stories of Cultural Resilience, and the topic is Preserving Tradition in a Globalized World. First on the panel, we have Prachi Raturi. Prachi Raturi Mishra has been a journalist since she was 19 years old. Realms and realms of newsprints, and 4 books later, she has written Uttarakhand's cuisine, food, and folktales from the hills as a tribute to what has made her who she is. This book is her ode to the hills and mountains of Uttarakhand, its food, culture, and the simple, hard-working, beautiful, inside-out people. Prachi's love her family and her me time to write and travel, not necessarily in that order, probably. Prachi is the co founder and managing editor of the Mind Diaries, a bi monthly magazine, the first of its kind in India on mental health and well being. She lives in Greater Noida with her husband Sandeep, daughter Gaura, and Noni, her dog. Next on the panel, we have Catherine. Catherine Ann Jones' connection with India began with her marriage to the novelist Raja Rao, which included a year as a Fulbright research scholar in India and continued through annual visits for substantial amount of time. An award-winning author and playwright, she is also a screenwriter, writing consultant, and actor, having played major roles in Broadway and off-Broadway. Films she has written includes The Christmas Wife with Jason Robards and Julius Harris, which gained 4 Emmy nominations. Unlike Angel with Dolly Parton and the popular TV series Touched by an Angel. She has also authored 7 books, including Healing Your Inner Self and Writing.
I'd like you also, my last book is called East and West, Stories of India, which suits your topic tonight. That's why I wanted to mention the 7th book. Yeah.
Okay. So resilience often stems from the ability to adapt while staying rooted in one's identity. How do your writings reflect your interplay between tradition and transformation? Let's have it from you, Catherine.
How do the writings reflect what? Could you say again?
So resilience often stems from the ability to adapt while staying rooted in one's identity.
Yes.
How do your writing reflect that interplay between tradition and transformation?
I think I will respond mostly today with short excerpts or talk about one or more of the 15 stories, just 4. The title story, East and West, I think responds to that. It's about an aging Sanskrit scholar and professor in Mysore, and his son, who says, India is the past, America is the future. After he goes to ITT in Delhi, he goes to MIT for his graduate degree in Boston and experiences the dark side of America, the shadow side. Every country has its shadow. And then he comes back just as his father is dying. And I'm going to, well, I guess I could start by reading that. I was going to do it later, but that's, let me find it here. It's, sorry, I had prepared this one.
It's okay.
But since I brought it up, it should be here. Page 337. It's, if that's okay, it's just a short excerpt, and I think it answers that question. Yes. So he flies from Bangalore to Varanasi because his father's wish, as he's a Brahmin, to bring his ashes to Varanasi, to the Ganga. The sun had gone to rest. as had his good father. Arjun sat near the water, watching the Ganges' serene, changeless, eternal flow. Not far away, a bright colored kingfisher perched alert, confident to secure his dinner from the sacred river. Even in this place of death, life could be found and the promise of a future. He bowed to the river with palms touching, saying, "Forgive me, Father. I always thought the conflict was between you and me. It wasn't. It was about identity between East and West. Yes, it was about identity. Who was I? Who am I? Indian or Westerner? I had felt that India was yesterday and that America stood for the future. I could not have been more wrong. Papa, I am not one or the other, but both. Perhaps the real challenge is not in choosing East or West. We must discover how to integrate not the worst, but the best of both worlds. Then will East be West and West be East. Then our beliefs shall meet, for then the world will be one."
Beautiful.
I just thought that pertained to I,
Yeah.
I see life as story, so I think as story. That's why I'll probably respond with story.
Thank you for reading that, Catherine. It was beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah, it was beautiful. Prachi, what are your thoughts here? How do you think that, like I said, resilience often stems from the ability to adapt. So, what are your thoughts on it? How does your writing reflect the interplay between tradition and transformations?
Right. So see, I've been a journalist for most of my life, and I was, even though I'm from the hills, I was reporting from Delhi, from Mumbai, then Hyderabad, and somewhere I think I was so focused on what was happening outside my little world. I was always very proud of my roots, but then I was just so focused on what was happening in the metros. And then when I came back in my mid 30s to Mussoorie, Times of India was opening its edition in Dehradun, and that's how I joined back. And that's when I looked at my culture from an outsider's perspective, in the sense of what would make interesting stories for a reader. And that's when I genuinely found there was so much to be told. I mean, I just took it
Yeah.
for granted what was happening, all the little stories that I've grown up with. My father was my grandfather was a journalist and a historian as well. My father and mother are both teachers, so we always grew up around stories, a lot of folk tales, a lot of traditions, but somehow I just took them for granted, and I just thought, okay, they're there. But when I reported and I looked at the stories from an outsider's perspective, I actually ended up doing stories that made it to all centers of Times of India, on the Sunday Times, as well as other places. There was a lot of positive feedback. A lot of people were getting back. And that's when I realized that, okay, these are stories that need to be told. And that's where the idea for a book on Uttarakhand cuisine really germinated. I've been, I love to eat food, and I know it shows, but so far, my love for food was only restricted to eating. And here I was suddenly writing a book on the cuisine, and how it would be probably different is I've woven a lot of stories. Nostalgia has become a very important part of the book, really. So it's a food memoir where we're talking of little stories from my childhood, stories from the hills, and I've interwoven it with some folk tales. And Home Book's been very kind to bring it out in the format I wanted. And um, I I have seen a lot of people, actually, a lot of my friends in other countries are buying the books, and they're absolutely loving it for the way how we are all connected, really. Like Catherine pointed out, there is not this or that. There is both, and the fact when we combine both is when we really see ourselves and the world in a better light.
Mhm. Right. So coming from that, both food and stories, they have a universal connectors. They are like universal connector, like food, story. They're something that bring people on one table. So how do these elements help in making the cultural richness of Uttarakhand or India as a whole for more accessible to global readers? Am I audible?
Well, if it's about food, you
Yeah.
should
Let's
ask
have it from the
Prachi.
category.
I think she'd be better at that.
No,
I love Indian
it's
food.
even about your East-West stories. Like, it's about stories as well. Like, how do they bring about people together and making it more accessible to the global readers?
Okay, if I start, let me read the short preface to
Okay.
my book. By the way, you can find it on Flipkart and bookstores in India too, East and West. This is the preface. Stories orient the life of a people through time, establishing the reality of their world. Thus, meaning and purpose are given to people's life. Without stories, we do not exist. They are how we discover who we are. This particular collection of stories is imagined, though sometimes inspired by fact.
Hmm.
They came about because of a marriage that carried me away to far off India, which in time became my spiritual home. India is a vast and complex country and one that can change a life, containing the highest mystical experiences side by side with the lowest dregs of humanity. From my own experience of living many years in India, the sublime mythology of this incredible and complex culture so permeates the personal that myth often becomes reality and reality myth. The aim of these stories is to serve as a kind of portal into the daily lives and emotional realities that reflect the rich depth and humanity that is India. So that's how I respond.
That's amazing.
Thank you.
Stemming from this thought, I also had an idea like you belonging to the West and then writing East-West stories, right? Was it like something that was you were trying to even hold on to an identity, or what was it? What actually made you actually write it?
Um, you know, Albert Camus once said, fiction is the tool we use to tell the truth. So almost all of my stories have a kernel of my own experience in India, except one. I wrote a story called, where did I wrote it to? I was prepared for tomorrow night, actually, but
It's okay.
yeah, so I'm winging it here. Murder in Assam.
Okay.
And I've never been to Assam. So
Mhm.
I thought this is one story that has no ounce of fact or truth. It's total fiction.
Hmm.
I wrote the story. I sent it to a writer friend of mine, Ravi Ravendra, who sent it to a friend of his in Bangalore, who's a CEO of one of the Silicon-like places. She writes me back that what I made up actually happened.
Hmm.
Now, I thought of Plato's idea of all knowledge is up there, and sometimes you can tap into it. And that was amazing because it's about a
Hmm.
rape and murder at a tea plantation in modern times. And this woman's friend owned the plantation next to another one. And
Mm.
in the neighboring one, this kind of thing happened.
Mm.
So I thought that was, pretty amazing that sometimes I've had that experience in two or three other plays or films I've written. I thought I made up something and I found out later it was true. So
Mm.
I do think, it explains why certain discoveries happen at the same time all over the world and so on. So I don't know how that now you'll have to remind me your question, but that's what I associated with it. That
Mm.
fiction is our tool to tell the truth. I have another story that I deal with the farmer's plight and the farmers committing suicide, eating the pesticide.
Mm.
Um, and it's not the main story, but it's there. And then
Mm.
I have one called the bus home, and it's about a rape and murder. So I have the dark, but I also have the mystical and the India is, when Westerners go to India, at least Americans, no one
Mm.
comes back and when you ask, how was India? No one says, oh, it was all right.
Mm.
It's not possible. India has such a powerful presence. I find Americans either come back saying, oh, I'll never go there again, or
Right.
they fall in love totally with India. There's no in between. It's too, and
Mm.
my feeling is when Westerners go, it intensifies whatever's going on in them. So it'll
Right.
either be something transcendent or
Mm.
powerful that way or the opposite. But no
Right.
one could be indifferent. I think it
Mm.
would be impossible. With me, it was a coming home experience. I knew I'd lived there before.
Mm.
But anyway, I love
Yes.
India, but every country has its shadow. In India, it's no
Mm.
exception, of course.
So that kind of answers my question here.
Good.
Coming
In a
back to
roundabout way.
the coming
Yeah.
back to my question, Prachi, I'll repeat the question again. Both food and stories are universal connectors. And how do these elements help in making the cultural richness of Uttarakhand as a whole more accessible to global readers?
Right. So, as I was suggesting, the stories I have here, I think food is a lot about nostalgia.
Hmm.
So
Mhm.
I think that's a universal connector anyways. I'm sure the best memories we all have are of our grandmothers or mothers cooking us a special meal. It instantly brings us back home.
Right.
And I think that's what food really does. And when you intermix it with nostalgia, with tales, I think you really are connected. Then there are no boundaries really. You're all connected. And like I said, I have friends in Dubai, in
Mhm.
US, in Australia who've been reading these stories and coming back to me and saying, we loved this one and we've tried this dish. And I actually had a friend who last time when she was here, I gave her a particular thing that we use in Uttarakhand. It's like a tempering. It's called jakya, wild mustard. And she
Okay.
actually now carries it back with her. My mother used to teach in language school where they teach foreigners Hindi as well as Garhwali, Punjabi, our
Mhm.
languages, Urdu. And so here we are with this girl who is from Ireland. She was
Mhm.
working in Norway and she carried back the same seasoning with her. And I was doing a story for Times of India. And here we have this girl who's actually sitting in Norway, you know, and making a Pahari dish there. And she sends me a picture saying, look at how small the world is. And
Yeah.
we actually use that picture in that story. So we really are connected. And, that's what I was simply trying to do in this book. And with the stories I have, again, there are all these are all stories which are folk tales, and I've taken the writer's liberty of some genuinely had food there in as the ingredients. Some, of course, I interwove the
Mm.
stories there. So food really is. I've tried to bring out some recipes alive, and um, I've gotten interesting feedback, and the idea really is to get people connected to food, to probably bring out the local cuisine as well. And if
Mhm.
you've seen post-COVID, the world has suddenly woken up to their roots, or they're at least
Right.
wanting to give more time to things that should
Mm.
matter, right? Um,
Mm.
Families and meals together and
Right.
spending time with each other, probably going back to our roots and rediscovering ourselves. And that's what I've tried to do with the book, really.
I myself, I find my roots from Himachal. So I can connect with the idea of mountain and foods. But it's really like when you talk to people generally, they'll be like, what do you really get to eat on the mountains? Right? What kind of
Okay.
food and
Now,
what kind
the
of
sad
culture
part,
do you have when it comes to food? And all people can think of is Maggie.
exactly.
So,
Yeah. So
having a
that's
book
that's the
written on
sad
it,
part, really.
yeah, having a book written on it, and really showcasing that what all food and how food can connect people is really amazing.
Right. So when we had, for example, anytime I had friends who were visiting, and they said, where can we have local cuisine? And
Yeah.
other than my home, we couldn't really find places. Uh,
Mm.
so you get all the dal makhnis, and you get
Yes.
the paneers and the noodles and the chow mein and the Maggi, but nowhere do you get authentic cuisine. And
Exactly.
that's how I thought it's important to at least record them. So we've got recipes from Kumaon, Garhwal, as well as Jaunsar Bawar areas. Mm, and it's quite interesting. I've got over 100 recipes, which I was amazed with. I didn't know there'd be so many, really.
Yeah. I think that's the thing. Like with food, it is like kind of becoming like a lost culture, you can say. And when you write a book, you're kind of preserving that culture and passing it on.
Right.
So,
Also, I see a lot of
mm,
mixed marriages happening now. For example, I'm
mm,
married to a Bengali. My sister is
right.
married to a South Indian. Somewhere, I'm
Mm,
sure uh, our daughters will want to sometime talk about, what their nannies cooked at home, and which is why it's important to record. Recording food. That's why I think is
yes.
extremely crucial.
Yeah, exactly. That's where the nostalgia, what we were talking about, comes into play. So, from this, stories of culture often carry both nostalgia and hope, right? How do your books reflect these emotions while highlighting the resilience of the communities they portray? So, let's have it from you, Catherine.
Okay. Uh, I was a Fulbright research scholar in India for a year. So
Yes.
that I took a thread of that and made up another story. But at the end of the story, she's studying, I have the woman from New York studying Teum. It's a dance drama, ancient form, Dravidian form.
Mhm.
Before Kathakali, it's called Teum. And
Okay.
anyway, she spends a year, a year there. That was very powerful. And at the end, she says, let me find it here. It's called, what do I call it? A Fulbright Folly.
Hmm.
Um, and she she deals with an older professor who shows her a way and goes to the all-night performances, and they have dialogues, east and west kind of things. He's a director, and anyway, he dies. He has a heart attack and dies. So here's the end of the story. Saddened by the loss of her colleague and friend, and now herself riddled with amoebic dysentery, Amy at last admitted that she was homesick for America. And though she wouldn't have traded the year in India for gold, and would always be grateful for the profound experience of this vast and complex culture, she was more than ready to go home. In place of her usual restlessness was born a full, firm resolve to return home and create from the depths of her evolving self. She had learned that it was not where you were, but how you lived and gave back what you had found. In the end, in her attempt to embrace a foreign culture, she had faced herself, only to realize how American she was. In truth, this was India's gift to her, to accept who she was. Dorothy was right after all. Though the land of Oz was wonderfully magical, there's no place like home. That's a roundabout way, but India's gift was facing who you are, because, I see these people who go to India and they try and become little Indians, and it's not quite believable. There's a reason karmically we're born where we are. So if you can integrate the wonders and depth of India into whatever it is you are, then I think you're on the right road, and vice versa. And Indians come here, and they may wear New York t-shirts and all of that, but they're Indian.
Right.
And they can become more evolved Indian by integrating. I think what's sad is when cultures, and I've seen this in India, take the worst part of America and vice versa. If we could only take the best, like I say in East and West, the best of each, then look what we would have. Yeah.
Very true. Very true. What are your thoughts on it, Prachi?
Could you repeat the question? I lost this somewhere.
I said stories of culture often carry both nostalgia and hope. How do your books reflect these emotions while highlighting the resilience of the communities they portray?
Right. So, some of the stories I have are talking about how people in the hills, some of them, I mean, there are ghost villages, all right, but some brave ones are still staying back and trying to till whatever's left of the lands, still trying to, grow crops that their forefathers were growing. And that's how really these stories are born, because we're talking of black sesame seeds, which are an integral part of the Pahadi cuisine. We're talking of finger millets. Talking of barnyard millet. Now suddenly millets are fashionable again, but there was a lull phase where only the brave in the hills were still growing it, because it was suddenly seen as not a great looking food to have. These were dark grains, they didn't look good, they were coarse, but they were still being grown by some brave ones back there. And now I think that's what resilience shows, that land and still refusing to give up. And
Right.
now suddenly millets are back in fashion, and they've been doing it forever, and now their crops are actually in demand. So it's lovely to see a lot of talk around it. In fact, Dr. Pushpesh Pant wrote the foreword for my book, and he was talking about how there is the need to really integrate millets in food, and how people are so much open to it. One of the sections in the book, for example, also has some recipes which are a twist. So we've taken the original ingredients, but also given them a little twist for the ones who don't want to try the original cuisine. Maybe they're from another part of the country. So there is, we've made, uh, a jangora risotto, really, a risotto made of barnyard millet,
Oh.
which was interesting.
Mhm.
And stinging nettle. So stinging nettle, we've made a little soup out of it, and so just old things presented in a newer format. There are cookies made out of finger millets. So, more accessible, more people might be more willing to try that. That's one of the sections. And
Mhm.
then there are sections of chutney, there is raitas, there are main course
Mhm.
dals, and you could probably look at, so the ones who want the recipes, a lot of little stories there. So just stick to the nostalgia bits. And otherwise, of course, there are also recipes to try.
Right. So, coming from this, cultural resilience often lies in the balance between preserving traditions and adapting to change. How do your stories reflect this balance, and what lessons can readers take away from them? Because the idea after the food that I had is that Uttarakhand has been experiencing a lot of abandoned villages at the very same time. When we are talking about food and we're talking about all those things. So, what are your thoughts on this? How does your book, cater to
So,
that? Hmm.
right. So, one of the, the ways the book's idea actually came to me was there's a Winterline Carnival that happens in Missouri every year,
Hmm.
which is where I'm from. And I was a full-time journalist then when, there's a food committee that said, we would like some thoughts and can we, all sit together and probably think of organizing a food festival where it was already happening, but making it more collaborative. So we got some local women to cook their cuisine in front of a people. There was a little competition that happened, and they actually won awards for it. And
Hmm.
so there was this talk happening around food then,
Hmm.
and which is how I think recording it matters, putting it together matters. And the fact that initially, even the hotels we went to, so we went to a few five stars who weren't sure if they wanted to participate. But when they did, they realized that the food was sold out before they even started. So that's how it is. We presume that, okay, maybe this doesn't have takers, but uh, the I believe, like Catherine said, everything carries its own. It's all connected to the universe. Everything is connected. So once we have it on offer, then everybody connects and we all get together, and that's how. I did. Believe me, when I was thinking of this book, I had thought that I'll have to self-publish it. And
Oh.
I actually found a publisher who wanted it to publish it in the same format. So that
Mhm.
tells me how it really is connected, and resilience is there for anything that you want to be really seen.
Right.
The
It's
fact
very
that this book,
confirming.
uh, you
It's
know,
very confirming when that happens.
absolutely. So I believe that yes, these tales were supposed to be out. They were supposed to reach more people, and one goes on with that faith, really.
Hmm.
I must share briefly.
Mhm.
When I was my Fulbright year, I wrote a short story set in Kottayam in Kerala called Rootman is God. Later, it was published in London in a magazine. And I intended to write a book of short stories set in India. This was back in 1986. I never did because, you go back, you have a play to produce or a movie or TV. Anyway, I never wrote the book of short stories. So flash forward, as we say in Hollywood, until a year, 1 or 2 years back from where we are now. How many years is that, right? A publisher who I've never met in England read that one short story, Rootmany's God. He contacts me and say, could you write 14 more stories for a book of short stories set in India? Now, this is during COVID. I usually go once a year to India. I couldn't go. So, as if by magic, India came to me so I could sit in Ojai, California and write 14 more stories set in India. So I did go to India in my mind. So I think it's amazing. And I thought I always meant to write a book of stories and somehow lost, like Ariadne, I lost the thread. And it just happened. I find sometimes the best things in my life happen unasked and unexpected. And I find that magical. But anyway, I had to share that because, who you wouldn't imagine that. And
Right.
it happened. And it came out first in India, the book. And then, so that was nice. So, anyway,
Catherine, I
a
repeat the question
digression,
for you again.
please.
Yeah. Cultural resilience often lies in the balance between preserving traditions and adapting to change. How do your stories reflect this balance? And what lessons can readers take from them?
Okay, I'm going to focus on the what lessons. I
Okay.
have a story called The Ashram. I talked about some of the shadow stories, the darker side of India. This is the light, that extreme. It's about a Western woman who goes to Benares. It's a long story and there's a lot of twists and turns. But and she finds a teacher.
Mm.
And okay. Somehow at that last talk, the master knew even before I did that I would be leaving now 2 years later. I knew from within that it was time to return home. Though India would remain my spiritual home, it was not home. I said goodbye to my fellow pilgrims. Adele presented me with a painting of one of her feral cats sitting near the banyan tree. Prema had made a tape of her singing kirtanams. Young Tom brought me a flowering lotus blossoms. David gave me a small book of the Bhagavad Gita. The next morning, as I took leave, standing on the porch outside the talk room, the master spoke to me for the last time. The experience of being empty, uncluttered by memories or expectations, is like the happiness of open spaces. Once you're well established in the now, there is nowhere else to go. Happiness is understanding that. Be the silent witness, like a bird on its wings, leave no footprints. As a peacock lifted its beak and screamed to the sky, I bowed to the sage and left without leaving. There were no sentimental goodbyes. The impersonal veil of truth stood firm, and I was the beneficiary. My relationship with India would forever be imprinted in the geography of my heart. Persistent striving may sometimes be necessary, yet I understood now that realization of the self is not a destination as once thought, but rather a moment-to-moment awareness of awakening to truth. I strove toward God and stumbled upon myself.
Beautiful. Rightly said, it's not a destiny, but it's about, every step that you're taking. That's the awakening that we all are looking for. Um, Coming from this, your work often bridges the East-West divide. and exploring universal themes of healings and connections. How does your personal journey reflect, personal journey influence the way you portray cultural resilience in your stories?
That's a big question. um, I did one of the interviews I did from India on Zoom. Someone asked, because a lot of the reviewers, the Times of India, and all said, and Roshan Seth wrote a wonderful review, your wonderful actor there. He said, how can a Westerner understand India better than most Indians, or something like that's the depth of India. And they said, how do you explain that? And I said, if it's a question of how I can find the depth of India, it's not because of me, it's because I found a great sage in South India. And I actually went to India for a month and stayed 2 years, my first trip to India. So that part was true. So whatever is deep in the writing comes from the sage. I don't mean literally, but because of the because a true sage, and that's the Advaita Vedanta path, a true sage, in not the religion, but the philosophy behind the Hinduism. I once heard someone say, it's all right to be born in the temple as long as you don't die there. Meaning religion's a stepping stone to higher philosophy. Anyway, but the gift that a true sage gives is he gives you yourself, but capital S, not the little ego that can create all the problems and suffering we each of us have. That's a universal. But that's what a great teacher or sage does. He gives you yourself. And then you try and keep that self alive. It's a little like the oil lamp. The sage will give you the oil and the lamp and the wicks. All you have to do is pour in some oil now and then and keep it lit,
I think that is a beautiful takeaway from this, and how we have to keep, oiling our lamps and keep taking the stories, taking the knowledge forward, and really
Moment by
imbibing them,
moment.
working on them.
Yeah.
Prachi, as someone who writes about hills and their traditions, what challenges do you face in representing the authenticity of Uttarakhand's cultural identity for a broader audience?
See, for me,
I'm so sorry to interrupt,
I
but you're
said
not audible.
the big worry was that here I was.
You were not audible. I would
Is
want
this
you to
better?
repeat it. Yeah, now it's okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
right. So for me, when I was writing this book, I did not know if it was going to be published. I was just writing it in good faith and just doing something that I wanted to really do. That's what I was trying to do, and which is why I wrote it on a whim of, putting in whatever I wanted. A lot of nostalgia, food folk tales. I also got some paintings made. So it was as if I was, working on a dream project, doing whatever I wanted to do with it, really. You wouldn't really think of, folk tales really thrown into a food book, but I managed to find food or ingredient related folk tales. And I was just writing it with the hope it'll just happen. And I kept writing. And one of my ex-bosses suggested that, what are you doing? And I told him that I'm working on this book. He says, who's publishing it? I said, most likely I'll self-publish it. And he says, have you written to anybody? He said, no, I haven't. So then bravely I wrote to Om Books, and my editor was then actually on a hospital bed from long COVID. and he actually wrote, and that's how it just came together.
Mm,
I did not change anything in that plan at all. It's come out as it was. So the difficulty wasn't anything at all, really. I was just writing what my heart was telling me to, and the fact that it's been well received, I wasn't sure then. I think the difficult
mm,
part was believing that I will have many takers. So when I asked Dr. Pushpesh Pant if he'd write a forward, he
mm,
willingly agreed, and I was like, okay, I am not dreaming. This is actually happening. So one thing after the other fell into place, and then the fact that it's being accepted so well. And I was also called to the Almora Literature Festival, where there was a panel discussion on
mm,
folk tales and food and resilience.
mm,
So the difficult part was really in believing in it,
mm.
and seeing it through. And I think I just believed in it, and that's how it happened. So
Okay. Thank
that's
you.
that.
That's great.
So, as we come to the end of this enlightening session, I want to extend my heartiest thanks to our incredible guest, to Miss Catherine and Prachi here, for sharing their experiences, expertise, and valuable insights. Your stories and perspectives have truly enriched this conversation today, and thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Can I add, if it's all right, if
Sure.
anyone wants more information about my books, movies, whatever, my website's
Mhm.
wayofstory.com,
Oh,
wayofstory.com. So
thank
I'd love to hear from you. You know, if it weren't for COVID, we wouldn't have Zoom.
you. Yeah,
Absolutely, I so
And
agree.
totally.
Zoom's here to stay. There's
Yes.
always the silver lining in the clouds, you know.
Absolutely, and I'm glad we're being able to see those. So
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thank you so
wonderful.
much.
Thank you so much. It was lovely interacting with everyone. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank
I'm
you.
definitely getting your book.
Oh, thank you. I wish I could have some of that great Indian food. I really miss it.
Next time you're here, we must meet, and definitely.
I would love
No,
that. Namaste.
namaste.
Namaste. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.